The rise of China really refers to the last 40 years of China's reform and opening up. China started its reform 40 years ago, 1978. China was pretty much in disarray. Chinese economy was very backwards, and China just came out of the disastrous Cultural Revolution. In short span of time, only like 40 years, China has risen to become the second largest economy in the world. This is considered to be sort of miraculous. People in the world are kind of surprised by the speed and the scale of China's economic success. So I think this is largely how we define the rise of China to be a major world power. I think the Chinese exceptionalism is probably a concept in comparison or as a result of the much discussion of American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism has been defined and discussed, explored for almost like 2 centuries, starting with the French historian Tocqueville, and also the German sociologist Max Weber. They tend to define the American exceptionalism as a success story of modern capitalism in conjunction with the political system of democracy and the Protestant ethics, the religious backdrop, and which all those figures, the historians and sociologists and thinkers of the 18th, 19th, and even 20th century find that very unique, really exceptional in terms of the development of the U.S. modernity. The Chinese exceptionalism it's been discussed very recently. As a matter of fact, not much have been talked about the Chinese exceptionalism. I would consider myself as one of the first ones to use the concept to define Chinese exceptionalism. The differences between Chinese exceptionalism and the U.S. exceptionalism or American exceptionalism is that by and large, the Chinese exceptionalism has been pretty much a exploration or exposition by Chinese nationals, by Chinese themselves. And the world has yet to define what exactly is the Chinese exceptionalism. And there are a number of features we can talk about Chinese exceptionalism in comparison to American exceptionalism. One thing is that both Chinese and American consider themselves to be, in a way, destiny of the world civilization. However, the Chinese would consider itself both as the destiny and origin of the world civilization, whereas the United States only considers itself to be somewhat a destiny, but not the origin. The origin of the American cultures, American exceptionalism, really come from the Western civilizations, specifically from the Judeo-Christian and, of course, the Greek-Roman traditions. The Chinese, on the other hand, believe that the origin is uniquely Chinese, and China somehow is predestined to play a critical role in the world in the future. So those are some of the defining features of Chinese exceptionalism and American exceptionalism. And we are still in the preliminary stage to make a further inquiry into this fascinating issue. We have conducted a number of public opinion surveys, the global public opinion research on China. The existing public opinion research done by a number of US survey organizations. But since 2010, my colleagues and I in Shanghai Jiao Tong University and the Duke University started to collaborate on this project of global public opinion survey about China. We started with the US. We have done several rounds. We've done 3, and this year we're going to start the 4th round of the American public opinion of the or American attitude towards the rise of China. And likewise, we have done several rounds of public opinion surveys in Asia, like 13 countries and regions in Asia, and also 26 countries in Latin America, 36 countries in Africa. We haven't done really public opinion research in Europe. But as far as the results of these public opinion surveys are concerned, usually people have a positive attitude towards the rise of China. In other words, people around the world truly welcome a prosperous and peaceful rise of China to contribute to the lasting peace and prosperity of the world. That's a kind of general consensus. However, we see all the results from the different regions, different continents, that the public opinion towards China is mixed, especially concerning Chinese direction, and we talk about Chinese exceptionalism. And people in our world are basically concerned about the China's political orientation. In other words, how China has become a sort of superpower in the world, but how China is going to shape the world order according to its own political understanding of the political system and social system. In this regard, China is really kind of exceptional. You know, people do not really see whether China are going to move towards a more open, democratic society and become part of the world family members. Not simply the economic globalization, but also political and social globalization, where you have the ideas, some of the universal ideas of, democratic political system and free market economy and a large middle class and a diverse cultural atmosphere. So those are the features that people would like to see around the world, that China is moving towards the similar direction. So far, they are concerned as a result of our public opinion research around the world. People are basically concerned because they're not really sure whether China is moving towards that direction. So the soft power concept was produced by the American scholar Joseph Nye, who was actually a assistant secretary of State Department under Bill Clinton's administration. And then he served as the dean of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He coined up this concept, the soft power, referring to the use of cultural power, like education, popular culture, and all that sort of power of persuasion, rather than the power of coercion. In other words, the military and economic power in the international politics. So Joseph Nye was sort of pretty clear about the concept soft power, referring to the international relations, how countries deal with each other. The two sides, the soft power and the hard power. In China, however, the Chinese President Hu Jintao took up this concept and turned it into a big concept to promote China's soft power. He called it Chinese cultural soft power in his party congress speech as a promotion of the Chinese image, Chinese impact around the world. So this is the sort of evolvement from a strictly international relations concept into a broader, a kind of all-around projects and strategy to promote China's influence around the world. So this is basically a outline of the soft power. And China has, the Chinese government really has put a lot of, has really invested a great deal in promoting China's soft power. A good example will be the Confucius Institute. And also China invested a lot of money in media, the traditional media, television, the radio broadcasting, as well as the internet media. And China started a lot of exchange, a lot more exchange, educational exchange, cultural exchange, and many other exchanges to present a more humane, a better image of China, and China becoming part of the world community. And more recently, the Chinese government started to advocate a vision for the humanities called towards building a commonwealth of humanity as its goal, as its main objectives for its soft power campaign. Some of the American critics consider this as a sort of charming of the charm offensives of China to promote the soft power. And again, you know, like in the public opinion research, people around the world start to feel worried about even the Chinese soft power campaign. Like Joseph Nye, for example, start to talk about China's sharp power rather than soft power, meaning that the power, this cultural influence, the campaigns to promote Chinese cultures and all the images are pushed and promoted largely by the Chinese government. Whereas in Joseph Nye's opinion, this should largely come from the civil society, from the private enterprises, from the individual citizens. Whereas in Chinese case, there's it's essentially a government. It's a government campaign. It's a government project, and whether or not this somehow reflects the will of the Chinese people and the will of the people around the world, it becomes sort of problematic. So this is basically roughly kind of, I would say, you know, to summarize the soft power campaign in China, I mean, this is really related to Chinese exceptionalism. How exceptional is Chinese, the so-called Chinese characteristics, and how can China be really part of the whole international community, the whole world community, to adopt and to be integrated into part of the or what we call the universal values, or how China would accept the universal values. And this will be a key task for China, a major objective in times ahead.